Elon Musk started by gathering huge amounts of economic power. Then he expanded it. So many people thought that his acquisition of Twitter, now X, was a bad business proposition, but clearly it was not a business proposition. He wanted to gain this ideological power, which he did. And he was also quite poorly treated by the established elites. And so their goal is essentially to overthrow the ruling class, which they are in the process of doing right now.
Well, hello. Today I won't do the interview alone. I will have the help of Jean-Loup Fourquet. Jean-Loup, hi.
Hi. Hi, everyone.
Today we have the pleasure of interviewing Peter Turchin. Peter, thank you very much for being with us today.
It's my pleasure.
To start, could you maybe share with us how you became a scientist? And then after, we will have the time to talk about cliodynamics, which is the discipline that you created.
Okay. I started my scientific career as an ecologist. I studied how population of animals change in time, perhaps going through population cycles and also spread in space. When I started, the study of population ecology was transformed by the infusion of mathematical and analytical methods. And because I liked mathematics from the very beginning, I enjoyed this part. However, at some point, I felt that we have solved most of the important problems, and I wanted to have another challenge. And so I decided to use the similar methodologies of complexity science, right? Mathematical modeling, agent-based models, big data analytics, and as such, and to apply these methods to the study of the dynamics of human societies. Right now, history is a wonderful discipline, and historians are highly trained people because, you know, reading a medieval manuscript in medieval Latin takes a lot of skill, and there are many other things. But what historians have not been so good at doing until recently is applying the scientific method, which means that we don't only want to propose new explanations. We want to test those theories with data and reject them. And that's what I and my colleagues, we proposed, that we need actually a separate discipline from history, all right, because we don't want to impose on historians, so to speak. And we propose to call it cliodynamics. So Clio is, of course, the muse of history in Greek mythology, and dynamics means the study of change. It's a general approach that could be applied to human societies, population, animal populations, physical objects, and so on and so forth. So the critical ingredient that we bring to the study of history is that, first of all, we translate verbal theories into precise mathematical or computational models. That's very important because human societies are complex systems. They have many nonlinear feedbacks. And so you need a formal model in order to tease those influences apart and make sure that your predictions actually follow from your premises. And secondly, there comes the critical part is once we have rival theories, we translate them into models to extract quantitative predictions from them. And then we need massive amounts of data to test those theories to find out which theories predict independent data better than others. And that is the criteria we use to try to get a little bit closer to the truth. I just want to emphasize that in science, we never have the absolute truth. Science is a process. It's a process of rejecting bad theories in favor of better theories, but you never know the ultimate truth.
And like one question that I had in mind when you explained like cliodynamics, so if you try to modelize like how society works and what does impact them, how do you choose the criteria you're going to study? Like, because you can study, you know, like any set of criteria, like what is the strategy that you chose in order to know what criteria you're going to look for, or what criteria you think, you know, like the hypothesis of your work?
Yeah, well, let's take some specific questions. So, for example, one of the big questions that I and my colleagues study is, why did human societies become so transformed over the past 10,000 years from small-scale, you know, groups foraging or farming to large-scale and complex societies? So this is a question. Now, there are many different theories. There are dozens, maybe hundreds of theories that different historians, sociologists, and actually thinkers of the past, like Ibn Khaldun, Aristotle, proposed. One, you know, advantage of working on human societies is that we live in these societies, and it is easy for us to come up with explanations. It's very different from physicists trying to understand elementary particles, because it's very hard to imagine them, right? But in human societies, we see all kinds of things going on. So there are many, many theories. So this means that we actually don't need to come up with more theories. There are plenty of them to go about. So the big question becomes, how do we test them? And how do we model them? Well, again, each theory proposes, so for example, let's say the theory that is based on class struggle. So Marx, Engels, and others. So in that theory, the proposition is that once there is agriculture, some people will accumulate wealth, right? So there will be inequality, all right? And this will drive state formation, because the elites, right, people with wealth, will want to protect their wealth, and therefore they want some, you know, an army, police, and so on. And so that's how the complex societies actually form. So that means that to model that, we basically create an agent-based simulation. All right, this has been done by many complexity scientists. They have agents running in the space, accumulating wealth. All right, and then you can just start building on top of that. When you do this, one thing to keep in mind is that you don't want to over-complexify your model, because if you have too many things happening there, it becomes so intractable that it's hard to work with. So it's a skill, and as Albert Einstein said, we need a theory needs to be as simple as possible, but no simpler than that. And that's an empirical thing, you know, because we are testing the model predictions with data. And so what we want to do, we want to add complexity to the model until it does reasonable job explaining different empirical patterns. And then you often start removing pieces and see what is necessary. And the idea is to get at the simplest possible model that actually does a decent job explaining empirical patterns. So that's the essential process.
Si tu apprécies cette chaîne, pense à t'abonner et à activer la cloche. N'hésite pas à donner de la visibilité à cette vidéo en la likant, en la partageant ou en la commentant. La Fabrique Sociale est un média indépendant et a grand besoin de soutien financier. Si tu en as les moyens, n'hésite pas à faire un don sur ma page Tipeee. Même les petits gestes sont très importants pour la survie de cette chaîne.
And actually, like the result of this process, it's actually your book End Times. And what like this process of taking in and taking out different factors, you did put I think, really well the result of that process in the book End Times, and why sometimes, or why quite often, societies disintegrate at some point. So yeah, if you can summarize like the criteria and the factors that you think are essential according to your work and to the data. And I think it's good to, I mean, I heard that you said it and you wrote it, something which is really important for cliodynamics, and this step is to have access to big data. Cliodynamics is quite dependent of the big data epoch we are living in.
Yeah, of course, big data is a relative thing. So we are dealing with big data for, you know, human societies. But of course, physicists would laugh at us and say, "Oh, this is not a big." Back to your question. So yes, my latest book, the last book that I have published, is End Times. But I want to emphasize that End Times is a trade book. It's a popular book. It's non-technical book. But of course, in science, there is a lot of technical issues. So what I tend to do, we usually write academic articles which contain all the gory details, you know, all the mathematical and statistical details. And so 4 years before I actually, in 2016, so that would be 7 years before I wrote End Times, I published a book called Ages of Discord. Now, that is a technical book. It has models, it has tons of data analysis, and things like that. So End Times actually is a distillation of what we learned from applying all these highly technical things. But I believe into the importance of explaining our both methodologies and results without getting into technicalities. So we just want to emphasize those two aspects.
And that's actually in Age of Discord that you explain really precisely what the structural demographic theory is, right?
Exactly. And so that's where I translated into a suite of models which address different issues, different aspects of change, because, you know, human societies are complex. And so the best way to model them is you slice them in different dimensions and focus on different aspects of it. So that way it also guards against making models too complex. Yeah.
So in End Times, you work on the factors that lead to political disintegration. Could you maybe summarize how the criteria that you selected, the wealth pump and the overproduction of elites, influence the political disintegration of complex societies?
So, as I was saying, one aspect of our research is trying to understand how large-scale complex societies organized as states evolved. And this happened, roughly speaking, 5,000 years ago. But the second aspect of research is we have noticed that such societies tend to work in a reasonably functional way, keeping internal peace and order, maybe for 100 years, sometimes less, sometimes more. But then, at least in the past, inevitably, they get into periods of social turbulence, political violence, which you can call end times. So, why? Right? There are several factors, but the most important one we focused on is elite overproduction. So the way to explain it is that there's a fixed number of positions of power in any societies, and there are always more elite wannabes, or in the technical term, elite aspirants for these positions. And some competition is actually quite helpful and good because it allows to select better people. However, when the number of elite aspirants greatly overwhelms the number of positions for them, we have increasingly large number of frustrated elite aspirants, right? And many of them are induced to start reaching for power by using not approved methods, right? So that's a very natural human characteristic. So if you, I illustrate this idea in the book with the game of musical chairs, but you start with 10 chairs and 11 players, but then instead of removing chairs, you keep the number of chairs the same, but you increase the numbers of players. And so when you have, start with 11 and it's 12, 15, 20, 30, 40, you can imagine how quickly chaos will ensue when you have so many players. So in real life, when there are too many elite aspirants, large numbers of them are frustrated and they turn into counter-elites. Those counter-elites, we often know of them as revolutionaries. So think about people like Vladimir Lenin, Fidel Castro, Robespierre, and many others who have started a variety of revolutions. All right. So the problem is that when you have too many frustrated elite aspirants, they actually start linking amongst themselves, not necessarily into one radical party. Typically, there could be right-wing radicals, left-wing radicals. They could be fighting amongst themselves, but they are networking and they are creating networks of power. And their goal is to overthrow the reigning regime. And that's what we actually saw happen in the United States recently. We can talk about that later.
Yeah, for you, then Trump and Elon Musk are part of the counter-elites, or?
They are counter-elites, most assuredly, yeah.
But one thing which is hard for me then to understand is, for me, Elon Musk, who is not a counter-elite in the sense that he is already an elite, or like how can I make sense of that thing, which is like, for me, he was always part of the elite, or the economical elite at least.
Yes, and that's a very good question. So who are the elites? These are simply people who concentrate social power in their hand. A small proportion of people of the society who concentrate social power in their hand. And of course, in my book, I do a dissection of them. There are different types of elites. For example, economic power, wealth, right, is one of 4 sources of social power. By the way, others are coercion or military power, but economics I mentioned. Administrative or political, where I can actually tell people what to do by virtue of being their boss. And the softest type of power, but very powerful, is persuasion, ideology, religion, those types of things. Now, counter-elites are also elites because they wield power, but they are outside of the ruling class for a variety of reasons. Okay. So Donald Trump, for example, he has wielded 2 types of power. First of all, he is very wealthy, and secondly, by virtue of being a TV personality, he had a lot of ideological persuasion power. But for a variety of reasons, he wanted to gain political power. Maybe he is just power hungry, or maybe he thought that the United States was not moving in the right direction, or most likely a mixture of 2. So he wanted to translate his other sources of power into political power. And that makes him counter-elite, especially because he was treated quite poorly by the established elites. For example, there is this famous White House correspondent dinner, I think it was 2007, or 2008, when Obama has actually kind of made fun of him where he was sitting. And so many people think that he started plotting his revenge at that time. Same thing with Elon Musk. Elon Musk started by gathering huge amounts of economic power. Of course, he was the richest, I think he's still the richest person in the world. Then he expanded it. So many people thought that his acquisition of Twitter, now X, was a bad business proposition. But clearly it was not a business proposition for him. He wanted to gain this ideological power, which he did. All right. So because X now is very influential and played a big role in electing Donald Trump last year. All right. And again, he has also, discontent. He is clearly not motivated by wealth. He has enough, but he wanted the United States to do different things, which is he showed now with Doge, right? He is showing exactly what he wants, and he was also quite poorly treated by the established elites. They, he was also subject of lawfare, not to such extent as Trump, but he had been slighted in a variety of ways. And so these are, they are, quite typical counter elites. People who have built power, but they're outside of the ruling class. And so their goal is essentially to overthrow the ruling class, which they are in the process of doing right now.
Very interesting. Okay, then like, can I take like 5 minutes to explain like how we plan to do the 2 videos, because we would really like to, because we are using some references. You are obviously one of them, and we're going to use, for example, Chomsky. There is a documentary on democracy, and I think it's not exactly the same thing that you say, but it's linked. And we have as well, the latest book, which is not really technical, but which is a really good mediation about the history of network information by Harari, which is actually, I think, really good to
Sorry, by whom?
By Harari, Yuval Noah Harari.
Yes, okay, yeah.
Nexus.
I don't know him personally, but I read his books. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. And I think because if your end times is a mediation, our video is mediation of mediation of mediation. So we simplify things, and we try to make sense, or like to help everyone make sense of what's happening now. So we would really like to know what you think about what we plan to do. So what we plan to do is to take a bit of what Harari is saying in Nexus, and to say, okay, why at some point in the 20th century, democracies, or like more democracies, societies have succeeded. And I think we plan to talk about 3 factors, which are mass education, efficient wealth pump, or not efficient wealth pump, meaning that the rich didn't get as much as wealth from the poor. And the last one is the autocorrection mechanism. The autocorrection mechanism, it's something that Harari is developing in his latest book, meaning that autocracy, they had no way to autocorrect themselves. Well, when you're doing something wrong, like because of the power hierarchy, there is no questioning of this thesis, and they go straight into the wall. When democracies have developed a more scientific approach, and you have like different opinion, diversity of opinion, that makes the error not going forward too long. Okay, that's what we want to say. We're planning to say. Maybe you're going to say it's bullshit. So we will reconsider our structure. And after, like in a second video, we want to say that, okay, in all these topics, it's going not that well for democracies. So our mass education, and relative as well to something we're quite involved with Victor, it's a recommendation algorithm. We think recommendation algorithm in our informational ecosystem now is doing the education and not doing it quite well. Secondly, like there is a wealth pump problem that you actually underline a lot in your books. So it's not working at all right now. So, I mean, the wealth pump is working really well, too well. So it goes to the wealth, to the rich, to the richest. And when it comes as well to autocorrection, it doesn't work that well either. Like you have all this phenomena of post-truth and all these kind of things. And the trust in the way we're doing knowledge is less and less obvious, like always all these questions. So that's what that's how we plan to do it. Like, so it's a big question. Sorry, it's maybe a hard question to play with. But do you think it makes sense, or do you think it lacks something?
No, I think that's it makes sense. I mean, I will probably disagree with some of the things that Yuval says,
yeah, okay.
But that's normal. You know, the structure makes sense to me. One thing that I should say, maybe you want to record me talk about the wealth pump a little bit, so because that's very critical.
Yeah, sure.
So
yeah, so absolutely.
Yeah, so let's do this now, and then we go talk about democracy more.
Yeah.
So why does elite overproduction develop? And in fact, this is a ubiquitous factor. We have studied now hundreds of past societies, and we find that there is often a mixture of different factors leading them into crisis, but elite overproduction is almost always part of this mix. Now, to illustrate why elite overproduction develops, I need to introduce a new concept, which is the wealth pump. So let's illustrate how the wealth pump worked in the United States. So up until 1970s, I'm sure that you have seen this famous graph where the productivity of American workers keep growing together, and also GDP per capita, which is similar things. And then, right in the late 1970s, the wages that had been going together with productivity stopped growing, and they actually stagnated and declined. All right. So all that extra wealth produced by workers started going somewhere, and where it went to the economic elites. All right. So this is what I call this perverse wealth pump that takes riches from the poor and gives them to the rich. Right. Now, why is this bad from the societal point of view? Well, three consequences. First of all, this results in what we call immiseration, right? Because workers lose ground and their well-being declines. And it's not only economic. You also look at their biological well-being, social well-being. So, for example, the life expectancy of American workers, it took a while for this to accumulate, but by 2014 or so, even before COVID, the life expectancy of the American population started to decline. And another striking thing is that average population height is another indicator of biological well-being. It also started to decline, especially for some underprivileged sectors of the population. So that immiseration breeds a lot of popular discontent and provides a lot of raw energy for overthrowing regimes. But by itself, this energy is too unstructured, right? So we need other components in order to create a revolution or civil war, things like that. All right, so the two other consequences. First of all, it's the overproduction of wealth holders. So in the last 40 years, if you look at uber wealthy people, households with $10 million or more of wealth in inflation-adjusted terms, the number of such deca millionaires has grown tenfold over the past 40 years. The population increased by 40%, but the numbers of wealthy increased dramatically more. And if you look at billionaires, their numbers exploded even more than just tenfold. All right, so that is this is one of two aspects of elite overproduction. Overproduction of wealth holders, because like we were discussing with Donald Trump, but also Michael Bloomberg, you know, Stephen Forbes, those were all wealthy people who attempted at least to translate their wealth into political power by running for presidency and things like that. The problem is that we now have, of course, not everybody who has wealth is going to go into politics or, run politicians, as Peter Thiel, for example. He doesn't, put his own candidacy in, but he supports candidates. Not, of course, everybody of those new numbers of wealthy people is going to have political ambitions. But some of them do, and so we have now 10 times as many. So this is the game of musical chairs, where we had, for 10 chairs, we have 100 players. This is a pretty horrible situation. All right, so that's one thing. Second thing, the last thing, is that overproduction of youth with advanced degrees. So if you think about the general immiserated mass of the population, the more intelligent, energetic, better socially adapted of them will want to escape this precarity, as it's now known. And how do you do it if you don't have wealth? You go to college, but the college degree has been quite degraded because if in 1950s, 15% of high school graduates went to college. Now it's over 60. All right. So you go get another degree, advanced degrees. And in the United States and many other European countries, the degree that the most useful for a political career is the law degree. And so, and by the way, that's, if you think about it, all the famous revolutionaries that I named a minute ago, Lenin was a lawyer, Castro was a lawyer, Robespierre was a lawyer, and Lincoln was a lawyer, Gandhi was a lawyer. And so this is the most, from the point of view of societal stability, this is the most dangerous profession. All right. And so that's what we see in the United States. Yale Law School seems to be particularly productive at both supplying established elites and counter elites. Okay. So these three factors together created this explosive mixture. The immiseration creates the raw force, and then the two types of elites, the wealth holders and degree and the credential holders, right? They provide the organizing structures that can overthrow societies. We've been lucky that in the United States, this overthrow of the ancien regime was in fact accomplished by so far peaceful, at least non-bloody ways. But in history, typically, there is a lot of violence that occurs during these periods.
So you think right now in United States we are in such a period where there is...
Yes. When I wrote the book, I said we are in a revolutionary situation which could turn in a variety of ways. Now we are in a revolution. Why? Okay. Well, because first of all, it's an attempted revolution of the elites. All right. So the MAGA movement, the power network headed by Trump, has won the elections and occupied the top. And now they are doing very systematic ways. They're cleaning the house, so to speak. Right. They are abolishing whole departments. All right, or trying to abolish them. And also in the FBI and CIA, they're also cleaning house. They're getting rid of people whom Trump considers to be disloyal to him, especially people who were part of the attacks on him by the established elites. So this is a true revolution of the elites. But it also is an attempt at transformational revolution. So the idea is to change the woke, nature of the American state, right? And it's also very clearly seen in the geopolitical arena, the external relations. Trump is rewriting the book, all right, completely rewriting the book. So there is an attempt to change institutional structure of the American state. Whether it will be successful or not, we don't know. Right, but certainly it is. So this revolution may become a failed revolution, right? If the established elites manage to regain power, but it is certainly an ongoing revolution.
Yeah. So in a way, is Trump trying to destroy all the autocorrection mechanisms that allow democracy to continue?
Well, I think he would argue with that. He would argue that he is actually restoring autocorrection mechanisms, because the argument that the MAGA network makes is that the previous established elites had really led the country into ruins, essentially, and that they were not responding to the wishes of the population. And in my book, in fact, I have a whole chapter where I argue that by 2000s, the American democracy actually had transformed into plutocracy, which means the rule of wealth. All right, and there are some very strong political science studies that show that the wishes of the 90% of the population have not been taken into account by the politicians. Politicians are only working for probably 1% or even smaller proportions. So that is that autocorrection mechanism actually broke down.
Before,
yes, and Trump, revolution was a direct outcome of that, because he was channeling that raw energy arising from the popular discontent, which resulted from the fact that American democracy or American political system stopped working for the 90%.
I have just a question in my mind. I don't know, maybe I understood it badly, but I have a hard time to understand why, when you have overproduction of economical power, you cannot have in parallel. I mean, when you have a lot more people having economic power, why do the elite class don't grow in the same speed? Because there is a thing, like, you have a lot of people having a lot of power economically, but you have less and less people having being part of the elite, and that's where the problem comes from. But I don't understand why they don't grow together. Or have you a good, easy explanation to understand for this phenomenon?
Well, maybe not easy, but so what's happening is that, as I mentioned, the numbers of super wealthy has been expanding. All right. Yeah. And what this has been done at the expense, well, it is often called the hollowing out of the middle class. Right. So our theory actually fits quite well with many observations that political scientists and, public intellectuals made. Right. But it provides for them an internal structure. And by the way, this internal structure is something that works in very similar ways for other societies in the past. Right. So we have the bloating. We have the bloating of the class of wealth holders, but this has happened at the expense of the rest 90% of the population. So we have many more poor people, so the proxy variable for it is economic inequality. All right. So everybody talks about inequality. Inequality is not a moving force in our theory, but it's a good proxy for the twin creation of elite reproduction and immiseration. So obviously, when that happens, you have much more economic inequality.
Yeah. Okay. What is your main point of disagreement, or the main point of disagreement with the work of Yuval Noah Harari or Chomsky, by the way?
Yeah, well, so we tend to make democracy into kind of an absolute, right? So United States is a democracy, China is an autocracy, all right? But first of all, and also people think that democracy is a recent invention. But in fact, our ancestral populations were very democratic. And we know that they were quite egalitarian. So with foragers and small-scale farmers were quite egalitarian, and they used, quasi-democratic ways to decide on important issues. So,
and that's your work in ultra society. That's what you describe in that book is exactly that.
And even complex societies, archaeologists now show that many complex societies, for example, the quite mysterious Indus civilization, there is very little, there is no evidence of elites. I mean, clearly they had to have, because these were large-scale societies, so they had to have governors and organizers and so on and so forth. But we just don't see, you know, sumptuous houses or, you know, wealthy burials and things like that. And so what we know is that actually democratic forms of governance were not only found in Greece, ancient Greece, but in Mesopotamia, in Mesoamerica, in many other situations. And also many systems are actually a mixture. So for example, in Russia, in Tsarist Russia, at the low level, the communities were self-governing, all right? And they actually had, you know, they were deciding things collectively. Well, it was the heads of household, so it was not, it was males who were the decision makers, right? But it was done in that way. And same thing for autocratic societies. You know, in China, for example, at the very low level, there is actually a substantial amount of democracy, right, where people decide, collectively decide their issues. So the main point here is that, first of all, there is no, you know, gulf between democratic and non-democratic societies, all right? And secondly, democracies, the Western-style democracies, are, it is rather easy for them to evolve into plutocracies. Why? Because, you know, media is extremely important. That's what informs people or fuels them with propaganda, depending on how you look at it. And of course, if you look at who owns media in the United States, it's all wealth holders. Every influential mass media, you know, from newspapers like New York Times, magazines like The Atlantic, you know, CNN, and so on and so forth, they are owned by wealth holders, and that allows them to have a disproportionate influence on the policy and politics. So this is these are you know, subtleties and complexities. At the same time, I'm not saying that democracy is bad or anything, right? It's democracy is democratic governance is like riding a bicycle. You have to constantly, you know, steer it without, so that you don't fall. All right, and in principle, democracies have a formal mechanism, so for autocorrection, as you mentioned before, all right, they have a formal mechanism for autocorrection, and so when it works, when it's not captured by by elite segments, then it provides the feedback mechanism from the general population to the governors.
Yeah, okay, so that's one of the main points according to you is the autocorrection phenomenon. Like, and for the mass media and everything, it's mass media or mass education wouldn't be that important, or like?
Well, autocorrection is not my terminology. My terminology is constraints on rulers to behave for the benefit of the population at large, rather than for their selfish interests. All right, and democracy is one of those institutions that does it, but there are other alternative institutions that have evolved in the past and have also worked in the same direction.
And do you have maybe historical examples of constraints of the rulers that worked?
Of course, we have actually we are. As I haven't mentioned it, but we've built a large database of historical information. It's called SESHAT, Global History Data Bank. And in there, we have collected systematic data on constraints on rulers. And there are a variety of, some of those are, for example, the presence of a large bureaucracy that imposes a serious constraint on rulers, because the bureaucrats can act in ways that will undermine, that would go against rulers. And of course, the bureaucrats are also susceptible to becoming a selfish, selfishly driven group. But that's basic. Unfortunately, that's what's known as the iron law of oligarchy. That's all governors are tempted to start using their power for their selfish needs. Another example, which we have studied quite a lot, is due to the rise of world religions during the axial age. That's the first millennium BC. What these religions have done, they have introduced the idea of gods or other supernatural forces acting as moralizing punishers, right? So, for example, in Christianity, of course, which we know very well, if you behave poorly in this life, you get punished in the afterlife. In Buddhism, you are also punished by perhaps, reincarnating as a worm or something like that. So, because these ideologies, because many rulers truly believed them, that provided an important constraint on their behavior, because, they wanted to be good people and good rulers. And therefore, many of the kings, and so there just a variety. Some kings were really horrible and despotic and grabbed all of the resources themselves. Other kings were actually quite pro-social, all right? And by the way, those who were pro-social had a better track record, and they were less likely to be overthrown, for example. So that provides another sort of feedback loop. So these are just two examples that we can give, especially with religion. Very often, religious figures would become very important in imposing constraints on rulers, because they would, preach sermons and accuse the king of doing bad things, and so that was another, mechanism. All of those mechanisms are not 100% efficient, but neither is democracy.
It's a bit like what you said just made me think about like the book of Joseph Henrich, or the thesis of Joseph Henrich, about how Christianity did favor some new repartition of the power in Europe.
Yeah, exactly. So in Europe in particular, because Christian leaders of the church, from the Pope down to bishops and so on, they had quite a lot of autonomy. All right. Well, it varied, obviously, but there was a certain degree of autonomy which allowed them to constrain political leaders from very selfish behaviors.
And so I wonder, because you talked about the role of religion, and an argument could be made that the decline of religion in our societies creates a lack of common values and understanding of reality, and that in our context of capitalist societies, money becomes the main medium of exchange and the main language, and so a society could reflect the values of money, which could be like individualism, competition, and an argument could be made that a society cannot continue or prosper with those values at the center of a society. Is it a thing that is it an argument that could be made?
Well, keep in mind that religion, in the traditional sense of the word, which involves gods or other supernatural entities, is not the only way, it's not the only kind of ideology. So I, for example, grew up in the Soviet Union, and the Marxist ideology attempted to replace religion. It turned out to be a failed experiment, because by the time when I grew up there, nobody really believed into it. But on the other hand, if you look at such countries like Denmark, for example, or Norway, well, they have a secular religion. It's liberalism, social democracy, and things like that. And so children, when they grow up, they are inculcated in school with the social norms that the educational system attempts to do the same thing that Christianity did, in the Middle Ages. And so most people in, let's say Nordic countries, they actually want to be good, all right, not because it's to their advantage, but because that's how they, they were raised, essentially. So, there are substitutes for there are atheistic or whatever non-religious substitutes for the classical religions, and in some cases they do work reasonably well.
It's funny because that's actually what we are working on with Victor. We talked about the recommendation algorithm, and we really do think that right now they are just dividing societies between different people, different values, and everything. And one hope that we have is if we try and if we manage to spread some recommendation algorithm that are actually doing that kind of education to all of us, then we will share some stuff, and we won't need, for example, religion or ideology, just value in common that trying to help society and being less individualistic and less egoistic could work as well. So one question that I have is do you think it's a good energy invested project, this kind of project, or what do you think? Where do you think we should, as a society, invest our energy so we don't disintegrate too deep?
Well, let me offer one alternative to that has been discussed, by the way, but not as much as I think it should be. So remember that in Christianity, the idea is that God watches you, all right? So the important thing is that in order for to control selfish behaviors, first of all, somebody has to learn about them. Well, now, thanks to the development of technology, we can make the operation of our governments much more transparent than they have been, right? So, because they are already, the bureaucrats and politicians, they already have they put things, they speak through, signal, for example, as happened most recently, when bureaucrats solicit proposals for whatever improvements, right? There is documentation that different, building firms supply them. So all of this can be made put into the public domain, and that would make it very difficult for corruption. Well, it will make it more difficult for corruption to occur, because corruption cannot exist in the transparent space. So to me, I'm surprised that there's a small group of people who are arguing for this, right? But I'm surprised that it is not much more, part of the public discourse that it would need. It would not solve all the problems, but it would really, transparency would really help for people who care, right, to go after corrupt, politicians and bureaucrats.
Yeah, about that, one of the main examples that we talk about with Jean-Louis is the Taiwanese model, which uses like the digital in order to make political life more transparent. And like 10 years ago, they put the budget of the state on an alternate website so that every citizen could comprehend how government was spending their money much more clearly than what the version that was existing before. So there's examples like that are emerging, but yeah, that. And
how well does it work? I've heard about it, but I have not seen any studies saying that. Is it really honestly transparent?
Yes. So yeah, Taiwan is one of the only countries in the last decade that have the democratic indicators that are like growing. Most of the countries they are like tending to more autocratic models, less transparent, less citizen investment. But in Taiwan, it's pretty much the opposite. And so there's a really great investment of citizens and what they call hacktivists, hackers that are activists and that are using the digital in order to make the democratic processes more active and more transparent.
Okay.
I wonder, what are you working on right now?
Yeah, so I'm working on, I'm tired of being called Professor Doom. So I want to, my research group is now studying how societies exit from crisis and how we can use those lessons for our own situation to avoid a bloody civil war and, you know, lots of people getting killed while accomplishing the necessary result, which is shutting down the wealth pump. So that's what we are working on now, and I will probably be writing a book about the results, you know, in the next year or two. So that's the main thrust of my research. How do we exit from crisis in the best possible way?
And is it the topic of your next book then that is going to be published?
Yeah,
like
that's what I want to make the topic of my next book. Popular book, the non-technical book. I have actually an academic book coming out. It's right now in production. It's called The Great Holocene Transformation, which addresses the question of how the complexity and scale of societies increased over the past 10,000 years and what are the best explanations for that. So it will be published in September.
And this is a technical book, or this is?
Yeah, it's a technical book.
Okay, and the next one will be the popularized book.
Yeah, well, I mean, that book is written already. Now it's in production. So I'm thinking about the next book, which will be a trade book.
Well, Jean-Loup, did you have any more questions?
Yeah, a lot, but
sure, we don't have the time.
But yeah, we don't have time, and really, like, thank you, Peter. And would you maybe, if we, I don't know, maybe you won't have time at all, but we will send you at least the videos that we're going to make, and if we have a script, I can translate it in English, so you can just take a really rapid look to see if we misrepresent what you said or anything like that.
I see. Actually, no. My French is not bad, so yeah, you can send it in French. Don't need to translate. I mean, it's not good to speak, but I certainly it's good enough to read.
Okay. Then we can send you the script when we will be more ready than now. And I think we'll try to integrate a lot of what you said, especially about like the other way to canalize the wealth pump apart from democracies, because I think that's something that we don't speak enough of.
Okay, sounds good. Good luck with this project.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Peter, for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye-bye, Peter.
Bye-bye.